Nobody warns you about this side of growth. People talk about success, confidence, and leveling up, but they never talk about the weight that comes with it. They don't tell you that improving your life can feel lonely and emotionally confusing at the same time. You start changing your mindset. Your priorities shift. The things that once excited you no longer hit the same, and instead of feeling proud, you feel guilty for it, like you've done something wrong just by growing. You feel guilty for wanting more out of life, guilty for thinking differently than the people around you, guilty for no longer relating to conversations that once felt natural. That guilt can hurt more than failure ever did. Let me ask you something honestly. Have you ever felt bad for doing better than the people you care about? Have you ever hidden your growth, stayed quiet about your progress, or held yourself back just to avoid making others uncomfortable? This topic matters because nobody prepares you for the emotional cost of growth. Outgrowing others isn't just about distance or drifting apart. It's about internal conflict, about loving people who no longer fit into the life you're building. The title says, The Guilt of Outgrowing Others, because growth doesn't just change your path. It changes relationships. It creates silence where connection used to be, and that silence often turns into guilt. The thumbnail says, Why you feel guilty, because most people assume guilt means they're selfish or ungrateful. They think something is wrong with them for feeling this way. But guilt is not a flaw, it's a signal. In real life, growth changes the dynamic between you and others. You start seeing things differently. You stop enjoying the same habits, jokes, and conversations. That growing gap feels uncomfortable, even when nobody has done anything wrong. You don't want to abandon anyone. You don't want to seem arrogant. You don't want to hurt people you care about. So instead of moving forward freely, you stay emotionally stuck between who you were and who you're becoming. That's where guilt is born. Not from ego, not from pride, but from empathy, from caring deeply about people who are still standing where you once stood. You remember the shared memories, the struggles, the inside jokes, and the version of yourself that existed with them. As you grow, it feels like you're betraying that version of your life, like you're leaving something unfinished behind. But here's the truth, most people avoid. Growth always creates distance, even when love is still there, even when no one did anything wrong, even when your intentions are pure. This video isn't about cutting people off or feeling superior. It's about understanding why growth can hurt emotionally and why guilt shows up when you evolve. Because once you understand this, you stop fighting yourself and start growing without hating who you're leaving behind. One of the main reasons you feel guilty when you outgrow others is loyalty. You remember who stood by you when you had nothing, when you were confused, struggling, or lost. Those connections were formed during survival, not success, and that makes them emotionally heavy. Your mind links growth with betrayal. It feels like moving forward means abandoning people who helped shape you. Even when no one says it out loud, you feel like you owe them your old self, your time, and your sameness. This guilt gets stronger when the people around you aren't growing at the same pace. You start seeing new possibilities while they stay comfortable with old habits. That difference creates distance, and distance creates discomfort inside you. You don't look down on them, but you also can't go back. You feel stuck between respect for your past and responsibility to your future. That tension quietly eats at you. Another layer of guilt comes from fear of being judged. You worry they'll think you've changed in a bad way. You fear being labeled selfish, arrogant, or ungrateful just for choosing a different path. So you shrink, you downplay your goals. You stay quiet about your wins. You pretend you're still the same, even when you know you're not. This is where self-betrayal begins. You start prioritizing other people's comfort over your own growth. You pause your evolution just to avoid making anyone feel left behind. So if you want to grow in your life without any guilt, then type growing is no guilt. The irony is that growth was never meant to harm anyone. You didn't change to hurt people. You changed to survive, to heal, or to build a better life. But guilt doesn't care about logic. Guilt is emotional, not rational. It comes from empathy, from remembering where you came from. And while empathy is powerful, it becomes dangerous when it stops you from becoming who you were meant to be. You can love people and still outgrow them. You can appreciate the past without living in it. But until you understand this, guilt will keep pulling you backward every time you try to move forward. This is why so many people feel stuck at a certain level, not because they lack potential, but because they feel responsible for other people's comfort. That responsibility was never theirs to carry. But loyalty and fear are only part of the story. There's a deeper psychological reason guilt shows up during growth, and it has everything to do with identity. Another reason outgrowing others creates guilt is because your identity starts to change. For a long time, your sense of self was tied to certain people, habits, and roles. When those things shift, it feels like you're losing a part of yourself. You weren't just friends. You were a version of yourself together. The jokes, the routines, the shared mindset all reinforced who you thought you were. When you grow, that identity loosens. And the loss feels personal. This is why growth can feel like grief. You're not just moving forward. You're letting go of an old self that once felt familiar and safe. Guilt shows up because your mind resists that loss. You might catch yourself thinking about the past more often, remembering how things used to be, wondering if you are becoming someone unrecognizable. That nostalgia feeds guilt quietly. There's also the fear of becoming alone. When you outgrow others, your social circle shrinks before it expands. That empty space is uncomfortable, and guilt tries to pull you back into familiarity. Your mind says, staying the same is safer than stepping into the unknown. Even if the old environment was limiting, it was predictable. Growth removes predictability, and the brain doesn't like that. This is where many people sabotage themselves. They go back to old habits, old conversations, and old environments just to escape the discomfort of change. Guilt becomes the excuse, but staying loyal to an old identity costs you your future one. You delay becoming who you could be just to remain accepted by who you used to be. That trade-off slowly builds resentment. Deep down, you know you can't go back. You've seen too much. You've learned too much, and pretending otherwise drains you emotionally. This internal conflict is exhausting. You're physically present with people but mentally somewhere else. You feel disconnected, not because you don't care, but because you've outgrown the frequency. Understanding this changes how you see guilt. It's not a sign you're doing something wrong. It's a sign you're shedding an old identity, and shedding always feels uncomfortable. But identity is only one layer. There is another reason guilt feels so intense when you grow, and it's tied to how others respond to your change. When you start outgrowing others, their reactions play a big role in your guilt. Some people don't celebrate your growth. They question it. They joke about it. They subtly remind you of who you used to be. Even when it's unintentional, those reactions sting. They make you feel like your growth is a betrayal, like you're breaking an unspoken agreement to stay the same forever. You notice comments like, "You've changed," or "You're not like you used to be." On the surface, they sound harmless, but emotionally, they feel like accusations. Instead of feeling proud, you start doubting yourself. You wonder if you're becoming cold, distant, or selfish. That doubt feeds guilt quietly, especially if you care deeply about those people. Some people respond with distance. They stop calling, they stop inviting you. They make less effort. And even though you didn't choose that outcome, you still feel responsible for it. Your mind tells you that your growth caused the separation, that if you had stayed the same, things would have been easier. Guilt thrives on that kind of thinking. What makes this harder is that you can still love people who no longer align with you. Love doesn't disappear just because compatibility changes. That emotional mismatch creates inner tension. You feel torn between honoring your growth and protecting relationships that mattered to you. No one teaches you how to navigate that space, so you blame yourself instead. This is why some people stop growing right before major breakthroughs. They sense the relational cost and pull back. Guilt becomes the leash that keeps them familiar and stuck. But here's the uncomfortable truth. People who truly support you may feel uncomfortable with your growth, but they won't guilt you for it. They adjust, not accuse. Others may not be able to follow you, and that doesn't make them bad. It just means the relationship was built for a different version of you. Recognizing this doesn't erase the guilt instantly, but it helps you stop personalizing reactions that were never fully about you. Growth exposes differences that were already there. There's still one more important reason guilt shows up when you outgrow others, and this one has everything to do with your values. Another reason you feel guilty when you outgrow others is because your values start to change. What once felt normal no longer feels right. What once felt acceptable now feels heavy, and that internal shift creates conflict. You begin valuing growth, discipline, peace, or purpose more than comfort and familiarity. But the people around you may still value routine, distraction, or staying the same. That difference creates quiet tension. You're not judging them, but you can't unsee what you've seen. You notice habits that hold people back. conversations that go in circles, mindsets that no longer match where you're headed, and instead of feeling motivated, you feel guilty for noticing, guilty for thinking differently, guilty for wanting something else out of life, while others are content where they are. This guilt comes from your need to be fair. You think, who am I to change? Or why should I want more? You minimize your desires to avoid feeling selfish. But values don't change to hurt people. They change because you're learning, because you're exposed to new ideas, because you're becoming more honest with yourself. When your values shift, pretending they haven't is exhausting. You laugh at jokes you don't find funny. You engage in habits you've outgrown. And every time you do, you betray yourself a little. That self-betrayal doesn't feel noble. It feels heavy. Over time, it turns into frustration, resentment, and emotional distance, and that distance makes the guilt even stronger. You start feeling like you're living two lives. One that reflects who you're becoming, and one that keeps others comfortable. That split drains your energy more than any argument ever could. This is why outgrowing others often feels lonely before it feels freeing. You're standing between two value systems. And until you choose one fully, guilt will keep pulling you apart. Choosing your values doesn't mean you think you're better. It means you're being honest. And honesty always disrupts comfort before it creates peace. There's still one final piece to this. Because guilt doesn't disappear just by understanding it. It fades when you learn how to grow without abandoning your humanity. One of the hardest parts about outgrowing others is learning how to grow without becoming emotionally cold. Many people confuse growth with detachment. They think distance means disrespect. But that's not true. You can care deeply and still choose differently. You can love people and still move in another direction. Growth doesn't require cruelty. It requires clarity. The guilt you feel often comes from believing you must choose between yourself and others, as if honoring your path automatically means hurting someone else. That belief is false, but it feels real. What actually hurts people? I assent. Tear grows. It's silence without understanding. It's sudden distance without honesty. When change isn't communicated, it feels like abandonment. Learning to express your evolution gently matters. Not explaining yourself to be accepted, but sharing enough so people understand you're not rejecting them. You're responding to your inner truth. This doesn't mean everyone will understand. Some people won't. And that's okay. Understanding isn't required for growth. Respect is. You're allowed to set boundaries without guilt. Boundaries aren't walls. They're filters. They protect your energy so you can show up fully where it matters. When you stop over-explaining and start standing calmly in your choices, guilt begins to fade. Not because others approve, but because you approve of yourself. You'll notice something shift when you stop apologizing for growing. Conversations become cleaner. Distance becomes peaceful instead of tense. You feel lighter. This is when growth starts to feel aligned instead of painful. You're no longer dragging old versions of yourself forward. You're walking freely, even if fewer people walk beside you. And here's the quiet truth. The people meant to stay don't require you to shrink. They adapt. They respect. They meet you where you are. All that's left now is learning how to release guilt without losing compassion. That's where everything comes together. Outgrowing others doesn't make you ungrateful. It makes you aware. You don't stop appreciating people just because you stop living the same life. Growth changes direction, not memory. The guilt you feel is proof that you care. But caring doesn't mean staying stuck. It means being honest enough to move forward without pretending. You were never meant to stay the same version of yourself forever. If you did, you'd betray your own potential. And deep down, you know that's not the life you want. When guilt shows up, don't fight it. Listen to it. Ask what it's trying to protect. Most of the time, it's protecting old comfort, not your future. You can honor the past without living in it. You can love people without sharing the same path. And you can grow without becoming someone you don't recognize. The moment you stop seeing growth as abandonment, everything changes. You realize you're not leaving people behind. You're walking toward yourself. Some people will fade. Some will stay. Some will surprise you by growing too. That's life. That's evolution. That's human. So, if you've been carrying guilt for changing, let this be your reminder. You're not wrong for becoming more. You're not selfish for wanting peace. You're not cold for choosing alignment. You're just growing. If this spoke to you, take a moment and sit with it. Think about who you've outgrown and who you're becoming. Share your thoughts in the comments. Someone reading might need to hear your story. And if you want more psychology-based videos that tell the truth about growth, identity, and inner strength, like the video and subscribe. You're not alone on this path.